Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey people, today we're going to take a look at Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the board game from Jasco Games. This is not to be confused with at least two other iterations of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in tabletop format that I know of. One of them is from either Hasbro or Mattel, and I actually used to own it way back in the days when I first got into modern board gaming. I picked up a copy in a math trade before I had a channel, so I never reviewed it. It was okay, not enough for me to keep, but it's kind of a collector's item now, and it's way better than a game from one of the major board gaming publishers, especially a licensed game, had any right to be from that time period of like the late 90s, or maybe it came out in the early 2000s. The other one I've never played, I don't even know who it's from, but I've heard it's terrible, so pay attention to the Board Game Geek ratings if you're trying to tell which one is which. Now this one just came out in the last few months from Jasco Games, who also did the ill-fated Mega Man board game. But essentially it's just taking place in the same universe as the Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV show, not the movie. No one's ever made a board game out of that. I can't imagine why. From Joss Whedon, I'm not going to talk about the whole show and what it's about. Look it up on Wikipedia. Essentially, you and a bunch of other either teenagers or 20-somethings are trying to kill vampires and demons in the beset town of Sunnydale in California. And in every season of the show, there are big bads. That's what they're called in slang terms from the fans and also from the characters in the show. And you are trying to defeat a particular big bad in every game session. And they don't have every big bad represented here, but most of them are represented here, all the major ones. And each player takes control of a different character. Fully cooperative. You work together. It's sort of, if I had to, before I go over it, if I had to describe it, it would be sort of an Arkham Horror, Eldritch Horror light type game. But it's a very interesting one at that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the game, and then we're going to come back. We'll discuss it further. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the board game, is a fully cooperative game for 1 to 6 players. Players each take control of one of the Scoobies, with the goal of defeating one of the big bads from one of the 7 seasons of the show. In the meantime, you'll have to fight off minion vampires, demons, and the monster of the week. If the Scoobs get too wounded and/or too many townies are killed, the players will lose instead. Setup is simple. Lay out the game board representing Sunnydale. There are card piles for events, artifacts, items, and Monster of the Week cards that you'll just shuffle for now. Make stacks of vampire and demon tokens, which are referred to collectively as baddies, and stacks for the townie tokens, which double as wound tokens if you flip them over. This is actually relevant for one of the loss conditions we'll talk about later. Every player chooses a character board with an accompanying standee, which gets placed on the indicated area on the board. You also have 3 basic action tokens and 1 special action token. Basic actions are things that everyone can do, but each player's special action is different. Everyone also starts with 1 item from the deck as indicated on their board. Lastly, whoever is playing Buffy gets the first player token, though this will switch every round. Then choose a big bad. Not every big bad from the show is represented. The trio is relegated to a Monster of the Week card, and there's no big bad board for Angelus, Spike, and Drusilla, but the major ones are here. They have escalating difficulty, though not in a major way, and have their own special abilities. Every big bad has a set of shuffled plot cards that afflict the players and also need to be defeated in order to win. Most of them also have a standee that will come out onto the board during the course of the game. Flip over the top Monster of the Week card and place the accompanying token on its spawn point. Until this monster is destroyed, that token represents it, and you are subject to its effects. To finish setup, flip over 1 event card per player. These cards will randomly place baddies and townies on locations in the town. There will also be a random effect that can hinder the players, like converting townies into baddies, having baddies kill townies, or limiting your ability to use locations. For the setup, though, you're going to ignore that effect. Every round of the game is broken down into player activation and monster activation. For player activation, starting with the first player and going clockwise, each player will take 1 action until all actions have been used. To use an action, you flip over 1 of your tokens. There are 4 things everyone can do with the basic tokens, and you can perform the same action multiple times in any combination if you desire. One thing you can do is search, which is just drawing 2 item cards from the deck. Alternatively, if there are clue tokens on the board, you can use the search action to investigate it, which lets you flip over a plot from the big bad. When the 3rd plot card is revealed, the big bad reveals itself and moves onto the board, and then the end game begins. The plot cards in the Big Bad itself have persistent or triggered effects that will hassle the players. In addition, every time an event card is resolved and the Big Bad is actually revealed, check the glyph at the bottom of the event and perform the applicable action on the Big Bad's board. You can do a normal fight for a basic action instead, which will stun a vampire in your area or allow you to challenge a Big Bad or a monster of the week that's in your area. Challenging a monster of the week requires you to have a very specific combination of items, and then draw an event card and check for a random required glyph as indicated on the card. Ignore every other part of the event card in this case. If it matches one of the 2 glyphs you need for the monster, you defeat it and immediately draw a new monster. Also, a clue token is placed in the defeated monster's starting spot. Regardless of whether or not you were successful in your attempt to defeat the monster of the week, you will have to discard the items that you used. Back to actions. Anyone can use their location, as long as there are no enemy tokens there. These are very specific actions, like netting you 2 particular items from the deck or moving around townies in other areas. Some areas have passive effects that occur at the end of the round no matter what. Lastly, you can move your character's standee. They keep this simple. You just move to any other location of your choice. It's assumed that you just get there quickly somehow by car or mass transit. Item cards and artifact cards give you new ways to use the basic actions. For instance, with a stake, you can dust a vampire instead of just stunning it with the fight action, and searching with the magic supplies will remove a wound. Many cards also accelerate their effect if you discard them or require discarding to use them at all, like warding an area against vampires with a garlic token. Artifacts are just really powerful items that either enhance you or give you dramatic effects, and like regular items, they can change your basic actions and a few can be discarded for more powerful effects. You can get artifacts by discarding tome items. Now we'll talk about the special actions. Every player's special is different, like Buffy doing a run, fight, and stun combo, or Xander giving himself and another player an extra basic action. Only a special token can activate these actions, but you can forgo using your special and do a 4th basic action instead if you so desire. However, regardless of how you choose to use that token, flipping it over will force you to draw and resolve an event card, bringing more baddies and townies onto the board and manipulating their placement on the board. You cannot avoid this. The game does not continue until every player flips every action token. You can, however, decide when you want to flip your special action token strategically. Next is monster activation. Start with the Big Bad and perform any required effects on his board, as well as adding a wound to the Apocalypse track for every character in the same space as it. Then activate the Monster of the Week, and finally, all of the baddies. Monsters of the Week have their own special effects and conditions, but otherwise they behave like baddies. If they start in the same space as defenseless townies, it will kill one of them, placing it on the Apocalypse track. If there's a character protecting the townies in that space, or a character that is alone, a wound is dealt instead, also getting placed on the track. If that track fills up, the game ends in defeat. Townies can never be removed from the track, though wounds can be removed with rare healing effects like from magic supplies. Also, remember that townies and wounds share a token. If you're forced to take a wound from the supply, but the supply is empty because too many townies are on the board and on the track, you succumb to your wounds and it's game over. If the baddie or monster does not attack, it will instead move towards the nearest townie or, barring that, the nearest character. Vampires and monsters of the week move 1 adjacent space, demons move 2 adjacent spaces. At the end of the round, remove stun effects, activate location passive effects, reshuffle the item deck, pass the first player token, and reset your action tokens. Also, if your character shares a space with a townie, you can remove it to safety as long as there are no enemies in that space at that time. That's the game. Well, I mentioned in my intro that the older Buffy the Vampire Slayer board game, the one that I actually played, had no right to be as good as it was, even though it wasn't that great, just because it was a licensed board game from a major board gaming publisher. But the reality is, even from a small publisher, licensed games do not have a good history. So I wasn't expecting too much from this new iteration of a Buffy game, and I gotta tell you, it's okay. It's okay. It's not bad. It's not really great either. I had more fun with it than I expected that I would, and at the same time, given that the games that I played felt very similar to each other, and there's really no new ground being broken in it. In fact, it's in some ways very derivative of other games, of course. I'm not really eager to play it again, and yet I didn't mind it. And I think that if I just give a little summation here, if I was someone who didn't play and didn't own as many games as I do, in fact, including a lot of cooperative games that fall in this same vein, and I was a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, and I am, but if those two things were together, and I was just someone new to board games and loved Buffy, I would probably love this game, because it would be way better than I would have expected. Now, first let's just talk about the basic stuff here. It's a good-looking game. Standees always kind of suck, but I also don't expect every single game to have miniatures, because that inflates the price, and they may still look like crap. So, standees, not bad. They use artwork. I think the artwork is from the comics. For those of you who don't know, after Buffy ended after 7 seasons, they continued the main story, like canon story, in comics from IDW, I believe. Also Angel. I read some of the Angel comics, and I think I read a couple Buffy comics too. So I think they use the same art from that, but I'm not entirely sure. But regardless, it looks pretty good. So I don't mind that. I just wish, standees kind of suck. Everything else, though, is fine. The card quality seems good. The board looks good. It's not too complicated of a board, but it could have easily looked like crap, but the town of Sunnydale actually looks pretty good in that format. And there's not a ton of components here. Everything's pretty easy to understand. The game is easy to learn as well, almost to its detriment. See, that goes into the next part I want to talk about, which is that this feels like a lot of other games. So the first time that I played it with other people, and I was going through the rules, these are people that I'd played with before and were gamers. They were not civilians. They knew, because they've played a lot of other games like this, they were like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, sure, oh sure, yeah, of course it's going to do that. So it felt very reminiscent of a lot of other things we played, whether it's Arkham Horror, Eldritch Horror, although a very simplified version of those games. And that's not a terrible thing, but it also felt like we weren't playing anything distinctly new or different. The other problem is that all the characters are represented here, all the major characters, even if they're just names and words on one of the Monster of the Week cards, like the trio. And that season's controversial anyways. But even though you've got all this stuff, and they're depicted very well in some cases, and there's little thematic bents, like how characters' abilities work and things like that, and so on, and Willow wants the magic supplies and stuff like that. She starts in the magic box. It's not terribly thematic in the sense that, much like other cooperative games that are in this same vein, it could have been anything. This easily could have been a lighter version of Arkham Horror, literally using the Arkham Horror theme, the Lovecraft theme. Or it could have been whatever, we're going around to different planet locations and stopping alien invaders. Which is not to say that I don't want to come down too hard on it for that, because having a theme pasted attractively, see what they're pasted, slipped it in there, pasted attractively on the game does count for something, but it goes right into one of my core problems with it is that it doesn't feel that distinct from other games that it could be, if that makes sense. But otherwise, the game works pretty well. It's very simple to easy to understand, and it goes very, very quickly, which is very important, especially in cooperative games. I've played cooperative games that are maybe in the same level as this, but they're just bogged down in useless rules and systems. This one keeps things going. Okay, I do an action, you do an action, we keep going. There are decisions to be made. Okay, we have townies over there with a vampire. We got to take care of that before the monster activation phase. Well, I'm going to go over here. It's a vampire. I can kill it, not just stun it. Makes sense. Perfect, because I've got the stake. Why don't you go over there and, you've got, okay, you might have the items that you need if you just search for a couple items, so why don't you start moving towards the big bad or the monster of the week? So there are decisions in the game. It's not overly simple. Well, in fact, one of the things I like that I haven't seen, maybe it's just on a game I haven't played, but I haven't seen it duplicated anywhere else, is the whole aspect of the special action tokens. Because you have your basic actions, and you can use your special action to activate your special ability. Of course, that's nothing new. But you could also use your special action token to break it down into just a basic. Okay, fine. The thing is, you must activate all those tokens. And if you activate your special token, even if you just break it down into a basic action, if you flip it over, you have to draw an event card. And the event card are one of the main ways that the game is working against you. But what's interesting about that is that even though it's inevitable, you can time how you use it. You can say, well, okay, why don't we play our special tokens earlier in the round? Therefore, we can see what the game does, and we can react to it. We have time to react with our other actions. The downside to that is that by doing that, you are giving up a potentially powerful ability to use later in the round when things can go to hell. And so it's that timing issue that I was like, okay, what do we do? I mean, do I risk essentially wasting my special ability now in order to have a little more planning for the future? And does everyone do that? Do we spread them out evenly since we all have our special ability tokens? I thought that was very interesting. I haven't really seen that quite displayed, at least in games that I've played. So I appreciate at least that little bit of interesting thing. There's also There's also the whole thing with flipping over a card to activate its glyph, which is interesting because it varies what the Big Bad is going to do from the set list of abilities on top of their other special effects. Big Bads are very dangerous for a reason. They can do a lot of nasty crap to you. And flipping over the event cards to determine that, yeah, I guess it's essentially taking the place of a die. But still, I thought that was interesting how it worked out. Especially, it's a little more frustrating with the Monster of the Week, because you can have the items you need in order to take it out, or the plot cards for that matter, and then flip over a card, oh, I don't have a matching glyph, and I lose my items anyways. That can be frustrating, but you only have 3 choices for the glyphs, and you have 2 glyphs on every challenge that are successful if you match them. So it's not as bad. There has to be some chance for failure, or otherwise this would be too simple and too easy of a game. So I did kind of appreciate that. And I think a lesser game probably would have just done away with that system instead of forcing you to take some risk and reward there. I like the variety of Big Bads. The fact that they 7 of them right in the box is a good idea. Because, again, for a game that's very straightforward like this, variety is key. And there's a lot of different Monsters of the Week as well, even though they don't have as dramatic an effect as the Big Bads. The whole idea of the plot cards also works pretty well, too, where there's a bunch of random plot cards for every Big Bad, but you're only going to see a total of 3 of them. So again, adding to the variety, they all suck and are nasty. So they come out progressively as you destroy Monsters of the Week and insert their clue tokens. Therefore, you can decide as each one comes out, all right, now we got to deal with this. Okay, now we've got accustomed to dealing with this nasty thing hitting us every round. Now here comes another one. On top of the Big Bad's abilities when he or she comes out. After the 3rd one comes out. So that's the thing, you have like this progression, like it just gets worse and worse and worse, and then the Big Bad comes out and it gets really bad, but that's the end game, and now you all hustle and get together. The whole thing with the townies and the demons gets a little bit annoying and finicky and fiddly with moving things about, but again, I like that's a little bit of theming that does work here. You want to protect the townies, you want to take them off the board. You have the Apocalypse track, which fills up with either wounds or the townies, and I like that you don't have to keep track of individual wounds, which is always just a little bit of a pain in the ass in other games like this. So, again, this game doesn't reinvent the wheel. And I think that's the only reason why I say it's just okay, because I've seen this done and better for me personally. And the theme is just not as strong as I would like it to be. But again, if you're not as steeped in cooperative board games as I am, and you also like Buffy the Vampire Slayer like I do, or more so, I really think this is going to be a must-buy for you. If you are not those things, if you've got way too many games as it is, and that fit this same niche, and you're just like a okay Buffy fan, this isn't going to be for you, because there's just not enough new mechanisms here. But I'm impressed. I wasn't expecting much, and I got way more than I bargained for. That is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the board game from Jasco Games.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.